Thank you. We've already got back to work as soon as we landed, in fact, and we've still got a couple of weeks ahead of work for us.
48 heures que tu un peu plus de 48 heures que tu es sur le sol. Tu peux
You
nous
made
expliquer ce que tu as fait
landfall
depuis ton
48 hours
arrivée?
ago. Can you tell us what you've been up to since then? Well, very quickly, we've got some sampling to do. These are things that are done as soon as we arrive back on Earth. Scientists want to have access to us immediately before we readapt to our Earth environment. So we did blood tests, things similar to that. We've also been working with a medical team, of course, who monitored us throughout the flight as well, to make sure that we're doing well, that there are no problems, and that we are able to continue the mission. And little by little, we're going to readapt. We need to build up our muscle mass again, find our balance on our feet, with a lot of debriefing sessions and then DBCs, which are basically data collection missions and assignments based on what we experienced as basically guinea pigs in space.
Des qui nous posent une question ici. Elle représente rêve d'espace, donc
We
rêve
have
de
a
gosse. Évidemment,
question
plein
here.
d'enfants t'ont suivi pendant ta
Lots
mission.
of
Est-ce que
children
tu peux
have
nous
been
dire,
following you throughout your
si
flight.
tu parlais à ces
It's a
enfants,
real
quelle est
dream. So,
la chose que tu retiens
what
le
would
plus
you
sur tes
like to say
expériences
to these
scientifiques?
children? What is your strongest memory? I really think it's diversity. It's the variety of the things that we do on the ISS. What we do is different every day. Sometimes we work on medicine, physiology, and then physics experiments the next day. What's important is that we're able to do all of these things and that we're supported by the ground teams in all of these endeavors as well. We did more than 200 experiments over 6 months, so scientifically a very rich experience with a lot of results. Another question, what was the hardest physical thing in space? It's not so much physically difficult in the ISS. It's actually easier to move around when you're floating. It's easier to be weightless than to have weight, at least in my opinion. The hardest part is the spacewalk, of course, getting the suit on. The suit is a kind of armor that protects us, yes, but also stops us moving freely. So you end up spending 6 or 7 hours fighting against this spacewalk suit that you can see on the photo over there to my left. And it's extremely exhausting, especially for upper body. A question in the room?
Lisa Adel, journaliste pour BFM
Lisa
TV.
Adel for
À peine
BFM
rentrée,
TV.
on s'intéresse forcément
Now,
aux
as soon as you got
résultats de
back, people got
l'exploration
interested
spatiale
in the
et au futur de
results
l'exploration
from
spatiale.
your space trip and the future of space exploration. It seems that your next target is the moon. Can you tell us more about that? I think so. I think that's the end goal for the European Space Agency, in fact. It's not something that happens every day, that internationally we all seem to be on the same page, to have the same targets and the same roadmap. So the aim is to get back to the moon, but as Dave just said, in a more sustainable way, using local resources to establish a more permanent presence there for scientific purposes, just as we do on the ISS. Once we've done that, which will be a pretty good thing to start with, then we'll be looking at doing that again on Mars. That is the roadmap, the overarching goal for space exploration. And European astronauts, not especially me, but everyone who works here at the center and everyone who works for the ESA, will be looking to play a part in that exploration process. Footfall on Mars, of course, is everyone's dream, but we're not going to be able to send everyone at the same time. And even if people are not looking to go there physically, people want to play a role, play a part in that exploration process, and that's going to be what's exciting for the coming years. Of course, everyone in Europe got woken up in the middle of the night to look at the capsule as it came through using infrared cameras, seeing that dot get closer. And then you have the splashdown, which is when you hit the ocean at about 25 kilometers per hour in the Gulf. Tell us about the impact when you land, and can you compare Soyuz to Dragon? Re-entry is always the same principle. Basically, you brake very quickly. That's the main feeling that you get. That acceleration as you leave weightlessness, you get about 4.5 G, so that's feeling like you're 4.5 times heavier than you are. And that's certainly not a fun part of the mission. And then you come down with a parachute, you get shaken around a lot. You've got to imagine you've got parachutes that are bringing you from 20,000 kilometers per hour to 8 meters per second. This room is about probably 8 meters high, so that every second. And all of that happens in a very dynamic way. A lot of shaking, a lot of being pushed around, and if we are in a Soyuz or a Crew Dragon, it's all the same. I felt that maybe the braking was a little bit stronger on my re-entry. I don't know the exact figures, but that was definitely my feeling. For the landing on the Soyuz, it's quite a violent landing because you hit firm Earth with retro-propulsion, but I do feel that the impact is pretty hard. And then the capsule tends to roll, because if there's just a little bit of wind, it'll pull the parachutes and then that'll pull the capsule. It feels a bit like being in a car accident on a motorway and the car rolling a little bit. But the Crew Dragon's a little bit softer. We were lucky enough to land on basically a glass-like ocean surface. There were no waves, so the landing was quite soft. We landed in, then the parachutes detached, the boats were there immediately. It was a pretty soft landing, and that's a great thing because after 6 months being weightless, you lose a lot of your physical capacity, and you can see it on our faces when we get out of the capsule. Physically, we're pretty exhausted by the time we get back. But overall, it went very well, and the landing on the ocean was pretty good. Well, we met you here at the Cologne military airport, and you looked already great. You took more than 20 minutes to answer people's questions. I do have 2 pages of questions here, but we won't have time to get to them all. This is Guillaume Pan from the Petit Journal in France, who's asking you what your first thing you did for pleasure when you arrived. I think the first thing is a shower. It might seem simple to you, taking a shower every day, at least I hope for you that you take a shower every day, but it's harder for me because when you get back, any head movement tends to make you feel sick. You lose your balance and you try to stay stable and to anchor yourself. And simple things like sitting on a chair, taking your shoes off, turning your head, these are things that make you feel nauseous very quickly. So that's something we try to do very slowly and little by little. I don't know if many of you sail, but when you've been on the ocean for a long time and you get back, you tend to lose your balance when you sit down or sit on a toilet when you're back on dry land. So we sit down on stools to kind of find our balance, but showers are very difficult. My colleagues had warned me about this, but experiencing it's different. When you're using liquids in the ISS, of course, liquids move around, you get little droplets that go in every direction, simply because there's no gravity. So when you're taking a shower, seeing all of the drops in the shower going in the same direction feels like being in the Matrix, the movie. It's not something that your brain expects anymore. That's a very long answer to say that the first thing I did that was pleasurable when I got back was to take a shower, to have that feeling of water running over me. Simon Rosé from RFI, next question. He was here when you arrived, but he had to leave, so I'm going to read it out. This is a question. You've already mentioned a couple of times the passing of time on the station and feeling homesick. How do you manage with that? And would that be an issue for longer-term missions like Mars exploration? And also, the scientific experiment regimen might be a little bit less intense than on the ISS for a Mars exploration. And a follow-up question, Thomas, did you leave Columbus tidy for Mathias? Okay, starting with the end here. It's unfortunate. We'd hoped that we'd run into each other. I mean, it wasn't our plan, but we'd hoped to meet on the station, myself and Mathias, but the operational parameters meant that that wasn't possible. We can't always just do what we feel like when we're in space, but I made sure that everything was clean and tidy before I left, and I called him up on the phone to brief him. We talked a lot to pass the baton virtually, as is the case with a lot of things, including this conference. We've got a lot of people listening in remotely today. So we tried to do it remotely, but certainly an in-depth briefing and debriefing. I haven't had any news since he arrived. He got there overnight. We got the first images in. I felt a little bit sad that I didn't get to see him when he arrived, though. And as to the passing of time and what we get up to on the station, it's true that the ISS, if you don't have anything on your schedule for a day, feels like a prison with a nice view. There are some fun things like floating around, but at the end of the day, we can't do much as you would experience in a submarine or a polar base or similar environments. The saving grace is that there's psychological screening for the people we send up. It's not a superhuman ability, but there are some people who are able to deal with that better than others. And another thing that's good for us is the work activity. Every day we have a lot of work to get through. We work from 7:30 in the morning to 8 in the evening. And we add in extra work, such as myself working on social media, so time really does fly by, so to speak. And we also are able to stay in contact with our loved ones. We're able to contact pretty much any phone number on Earth for calls, and every week we get a conference with our family. It's important to feel that we're still connected with our family and our loved ones. For the longer missions, the Moon, Mars, the isolation effect is going to be even stronger, and as Mr. Simon said, maybe fewer scientific experiments, because the science is going to be done when we get there, not necessarily during the trip. So maybe a little bit less to be getting on with during the trip, but there are definitely studies such as the Mars 500 studies and what we're doing here at the European Space Agency with other agencies that we use to kind of predict some of the psychological issues and some of the solutions that we might be able to find to that. The aim is to keep people busy, basically, so that people don't have time to get lost in their thoughts and to have their morale get damaged. Lots of questions about your health, especially what's going to be happening with all of the medical samples. David Fossé, for example, is asking how long are the post-mission samples going to be taken? And then a follow-up question from him related to the authorized radiation levels. Are you concerned about radiation and the effect on longer-term space missions, which could be an issue for longer exploration? Well, again, I'll start by answering the final question. What we do on the ISS is research for the benefit of the Earth, looking for results that can be applied to medicine and research. It really is a flying lab. But we're also working to prepare the next steps in space exploration, looking at people in space over longer periods, longer missions than even what we do today for the ISS, and how we can counteract the negative impact of space on human beings, such as research into radiation, how much radiation we receive, and how we can protect ourselves against it. Water, for example, is a great shield against radiation. So if we were able to come up with a design where the water tanks would be in the walls of a space station, that would be fantastic. It's a challenge because, as I mentioned, water doesn't really behave in the same way as on Earth. But what is definitely sure is that we're working on it. We also accept a certain level of risk. The way you quantify radiation risk is an estimated percentage of an increase of a disease such as cancer. So if you accept 3%, then maybe Mars is impossible. If you accept 5%, then Mars becomes possible. If you were to ask me the question of whether between 3 to 5% I would accept, I feel that 3 and 5% are basically the same thing. And I've gone on for so long, I've forgotten the beginning of the question. How long will you be working with the doctors? We've got 2 intense weeks getting off the plane, and then I was supposed to have a week off, but seeing as we got back a little bit late, actually, I'm unlikely to get a whole week off. It's going to be a couple of days, just to rest and to meet with my family again, and to sort out my regular Earth life, updating my driver's license, for example. And then I'll be back here for a week for debriefing. I'll spend 2 weeks with NASA. So up until Christmas, basically, it's a full-time job still for me. And then that workload will ramp down, but it won't just stop overnight. The rule of thumb is that it takes 6 months to recover from a 6-month mission. After just 2 days, it feels like I'm maybe back to 80 or 90% capacity. But to get right back to where I was before I left, it's going to take a full 6 months. So I'm going to continue to work on that. So at the moment, it's a full-time job, even 2 full-time jobs, but by the time we get to 6 months after, that phase will be pretty much over. Then we've got the long-term studies on my health that will require samples at 6 months, a year, 2 years, etc., and that's going to go on for a long time. It would be a shame for you to lose out on your holiday because you got back late. A question from France Info, Boris Allier. Offers and concepts for space-based internet are multiplying. That's an issue for space observation. Have you seen from the ISS an increase in the number of satellites? So you spent a lot of time looking at the Earth and the Aurora Borealis. Did you look at these satellites going around? It's difficult to see from the ISS objects that are orbiting the Earth because the relative speeds are huge. It really is like 2 bullets going in a different direction, crossing paths, being shot from hundreds of kilometers. Spotting one bullet from riding on another bullet is basically impossible. What I did see, though, and you can see this on the timelines, I took a lot of time-lapse photos. I just set a camera up and it would take 600 pictures and then they'd be played as a video, an accelerated video. I did that a number of times because it's quite easy to do with the equipment we have. Those nighttime shots show a lot of little lines shooting past. The lines shooting past, of course, are artificial objects, most of them artificial objects that catch the sun's light or that have their own light sources. And I didn't see that during my first mission so much. Now, understand that this is just my opinion. I have my opinion, which is a human being's opinion based on the photos, and my experiences up there is one data point. We need true scientific studies and conclusions. It takes hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of data points to actually come to a real scientific conclusion, and that's what we're doing with the satellites. And thankfully, thanks to the ISS, we have that opportunity, and that hopefully gives us that overall vision. AFP is asking, what is the main lesson you learned from your time as a commander of the ISS? 2 events. First of all, when there was a short drop in altitude, and then the film. So 2 very specific events indeed. And an excellent question. And it's an interesting question because it brings together the 2 components of command of the ISS. When everything's running smoothly, when you're working nominally, when everything's normal, we're just here to make sure that things run smoothly. It's kind of like being a coach of a football team. We try to lead by example by doing good work, but everyone's a pro on the ISS. It's not like you need to police them like a teacher in a class. So basically you're making sure that everything's running smoothly and shooting that Russian film. Those of you who may not know, we had a Russian crew with a professional cosmonaut and an actor and a director. They spent 10 days on the ISS to shoot scenes for a film that will be set in space. That was a new experience. We spent 10 years training before going to the ISS. Everyone was highly motivated. They had a year's training, barely that, and they weren't professional astronauts. So we didn't know quite what to expect from them, whether they were going to get in the way of our work, for example. We didn't expect there to be much of a problem, but maybe there were going to be some adjustments and maybe all of our goals wouldn't converge. But in the end, it went very smoothly because there was a lot of support from the ground teams. We always have a briefing for the new arrivals. That was my responsibility in this case. We tried to make sure we were all on the same page on what they could do, what they couldn't do, calmly but firmly, and everything went extremely well. The other example is the other side of command of the ISS, and that is managing an emergency. And that requires a completely different style of leadership. You have to take the lead. It's just like on a plane or on a ship. You need to have one person making the decisions, because that's the only way you're going to be able to react quickly to issues. The mission's in danger, the equipment's in danger. So you've got the commander saying, let's do this or that. And we were lucky enough, quote unquote, to experience this because it was a good experience. We lost control of the station for a brief period, and we trained for this, but of course doing it as a live fire exercise with your station that's spinning in the sky is quite a different experience, which is the least we can say. But we never lost communication with the command center on the ground, which is an ideal situation because it means that things can be done with them. And we allocated roles. At least that was my job, was to tell each person what they had to do in a smart way, and we were able to get back on course quite quickly. So I got the full experience, and I learned a lot. Maxime Aguet from West France is asking us, which are the fields in which you feel like you learned the most? Joseph Ashvarer, your boss, earlier said that you had made a lot of progress and that you had become one of our most highly qualified astronauts from a technical and social perspective. How do you feel? I think that from a technical standpoint, well, this might not seem very modest, but I think that even from the very first mission, you've had 10 years training, so you're pretty well prepared. Maybe on the second mission, you read a bit less the manuals, whereas for the first mission, you know them cover to cover. And the second difference is that for the spacewalks, I was lucky enough to do 4 of them during that mission. As in one case, the EV1, so the leader of the pair that's going out for 3 of those spacewalks, and that gave me the experience of managing a spacewalk from beginning to end. Not just as someone who's receiving orders, but someone who is giving the orders, who's a little bit more involved in a leadership role. And that gave me a lot of experience in that setting, and I hope that I can then contribute that experience to the various projects at the ESA. The second thing is, as we mentioned earlier, the leadership role side of things, what came with the role as a commander and also commanding the spacewalks. It's basically the same thing. You're not doing anything different, but when it's your responsibility, you're not just pressing a button when you're told to press a button. When you're giving the orders, it feels very different. It gives you a different perspective on things and requires a lot of preparation work and peripheral work, shall we say. So that really was the difference from my first mission. On the first mission, I was the youngest of the team. I still was the youngest on the team on the second mission, but I had a little bit more experience, and now I've got more experience as well on the spacewalks. I've probably got the most spacewalk experience outside of NASA and the Russians. So you've got your boss right next to you. Question from David Fawcett. And this is kind of the way to wrap up. So if you could pick, would you be the first European on the Gateway before 2030, or would you be the first European on the moon? Well, the thing is, it's not our choice. It's Dave who's going to... Well, it might not be Dave, but I can at least look at him and ask him. There'll be a sequence of events, and everything that we do is going to be part of a plan. It's not just a one-off where we go, okay, there's a man on the Gateway, that's it, we're done. That's really not how we work. At least that's not how the ESA works. We want a long-term roadmap, something that makes sense going forward over multiple years and decades. I think if you were to ask anyone, people would want to walk on the moon. People already did it for the first time decades ago. We haven't had a European yet, and this is going to be a very different process, and it will be a great adventure to experience, especially as this is also kind of seen as a step towards Mars. So if I were given the choice, and I'm not being given the choice, If I were being given the choice, I would want to walk on the moon, but I think that pretty much everyone would say the same. Jean-Christophe Batteria for France Television is asking us, what is the role that you will play in selection for future astronauts?
And we're
at
listening
ESA?
there to French astronaut Thomas Pesquet recounting his experience during his 6 months at the International Space Station. And joining me here on